Hi, and welcome to the Authentic Faith Podcast. I am so grateful that you're here. Maybe you've been listening along this whole time, or maybe you're new. But either way, I'm going to ask that you subscribe to this YouTube channel or to this podcast app so that you can follow along and increase the chances of someone else listening in and being inspired and encouraged. So please go subscribe, like, share, follow, whatever it is on the app that you're listening to this on, but also share it. If you get to the end and this has blessed you or you know someone who needs to hear this, then please share it. We are on episode 4 of season 2 of My Story. My story this season has been focused on exactly that, my story. My journey through an abusive relationship, and now we're going to kind of morph into how I got out of it and the healing I've gone through. My name is Andrea John. I'm a wife, a mom, a daughter of God. I love to write, so I consider myself an author. I work full-time as a project manager and a program manager. I'm very analytical in my thinking. I absolutely love to learn, but I'm also very prophetic. So there's a lot of facets to the things that I love and enjoy, which is why sometimes on this podcast, you're going to find us a little bit all over the place because it's authentic faith. I love to ask questions. I love to learn. And this season of My Story is really geared towards talking about a very difficult topic, which is abuse. And especially within the context of church culture, it's something, unfortunately, that's not really talked about. A lot of people have this fear of talking about it because they don't want to seem like they're condoning divorce. And I don't condone divorce. I believe that marriage is a sacred union, a covenant relationship that's not just beautiful, but also very sacred. And there's a lot of implications within that context of relationship, even within the spirit. And to break it is a very serious thing. So I'm not here condoning divorce, encouraging divorce in any way. What I am doing is giving a voice to the voiceless and giving a voice to those who may feel like they're losing their mind and don't really know if what they're experiencing is abuse. My story is not like anyone else's. Your story is not like anyone else's. And although there are things you may relate to, things that I've gone through that you may be like, hey, that's so like me, I'm pretty sure that there's these little nuances within your story that makes it unique. I'm only here to paint a picture, but the details of that picture, the perception of that picture is really up to you. So I'm here to shed light on the abuse that happens within Christian relationships that is often allowed and encouraged and looked over. But I do not tolerate abuse of any kind. Anyone who knows me knows that I am extremely anti-bullying. Any form of control or manipulation just sets me off. I do not like bullying in any form or fashion. And within the context of marriage, it is something that I experienced for 12 years and have no tolerance for. And I say that very confidently and without any hesitation on being so absolute. I have no tolerance for abuse of any kind. I have no tolerance for bullying of any kind, and I have no tolerance for control and manipulation of people of any kind. So with that being said, I have shared my story over the last 3 episodes, and I didn't share a podcast episode in the last couple weeks because I was in this place of, I felt like I got out of it what I needed to for my own personal healing. And I know that it had impact on the people who did listen to it because, some of you are just amazing and you guys are so supportive and listen all the time, and you're also sharing the content. So I've actually received messages from people of how wonderful they think it is and how glad they are that I'm bringing awareness, and some of them how they identify currently or have in the past with my situations. So that's wonderful. But I'm one of those people who is always looking for the solution. And I may have a little bit of a pity party, but I quickly get over it and I move on, and I'm looking for, how do we fix this? How do we make this better? How do we move forward? So I was in this place of, I wanted to give a voice to all those people who are going through it or have gone through it and feel crazy, and honor that, but also get to a place where you may have gone through this or you may be going through this, but let's move forward. Like, let's improve your quality of life. So I was kind of juggling those two in what would I do. So talking through it with my husband actually helped me come up with a plan of how I'm going to close this season. So we're going to have 2 more episodes. So obviously this is one of them. And in this episode, what I'm going to do is share with you how I made my way out of the abusive relationship and the difficulties I experienced during the separation and divorce that I went through, spiritually, emotionally, like every aspect. There is a lot of people who go through abuse, there is a level of comfort because that's what you know. You only stay in it because there's a level of comfort, as weird as it is. And then making the choice to leave led me to this place of extreme discomfort. Life was upside down. I didn't know what was to come. It was all very scary. And I went through that for 2 years. Many people don't talk about that, and they don't prepare people for how hard it's going to be if you do choose to leave, if you do choose to go through separation and eventually divorce. But it is a very difficult time, and it's one worth taking, may I add. It's very easy to stay in the comfort, and then it's really hard to transition out. But then by the time you make it out on the other end, it's totally and absolutely worth it. You don't feel that when you're going through it. It's such a dark place. But what I'm hoping that I accomplish through these episodes is to give you a hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that it will get better, that this is not the end, and you won't always feel this way. You will be able to enjoy life at some point. You just have to keep moving. And I'm going to share tips on how I did that too. And then the last episode, maybe next week or whenever I get to it, it's been a little busy, I'm going to talk about the healing process. Once I did get out and that transition time was nearing an end, how did I move into a time of healing where I could actually be productive and not be in that discomfort all the time, and how my healing walk has gone since, bringing me to today. So that's going to be our last 2 episodes closing this season of my story. So again, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate your support. If you haven't yet liked or subscribed, please do so, because that's an amazing way to support something simple that you can do. So let's move on to, I shared about the sexual abuse I've gone through. I shared about the psychological and emotional abuse. I didn't focus so much on the emotional abuse, but I'm going to kind of move on to the stepping into the courage that I needed to walk away and what that looked like for me. Again, this is going to be different for everyone, but I'm just sharing my story. Whether you agree or not with my perspective, with my story, is indifferent to what actually happened, because I know what happened and I'm confident in it. I have not shared this part of my story publicly in this level of detail ever, because I was always worried about the critique and judgmental views of what I'm about to share. And I think that those of you who grew up in a religious environment, you may pick up on what that is. If you don't, then good for you. I'll just leave it at that. So if you remember, if you listen back, if you haven't, I'd suggest you go back and listen. When I shared about the sexual abuse while I was on a cruise where my daughter was there and he was attempting actually to sexually abuse me, but he hit me in my stomach and all of that. That was during the holidays. So it was Christmas, New Year's time. We were on the ship for Christmas. And then after that, we were going to spend New Year's with friends in Florida. And when I started to see the aggressive behavior towards my young daughters, who were, I think they were like 6 and 7 at the time, that's really what opened my eyes to this is not okay. There's something extremely wrong. But before I went on this holiday vacation, the church that I was attending, they were planning a corporate 21-day fast, of which I felt very compelled. If I were to use words that made sense to me and may make sense to you, I felt very compelled, like my intuition was, I must do this fast too. And I had never done a 21-day fast, didn't know a lot about the Daniel fast, but I knew that's probably what I was going to be doing. And while I was on vacation, that's where my mind was at. I was constantly thinking, how am I going to do the 21-day fast? What can I eat? What can't I eat? What am I going to read in the Bible? Am I going to read a book? What time am I going to do my devotions? Things like that. Because that's how I work, guys. I'm a very logical person, as you probably have been able to tell. So I made all these plans, and that's kind of where my mind was. So we returned from vacation, get into the groove. I'm ready to go, pretty much going on a vegan diet, have it all planned out. And I had this closet that had a built-in bench, could still picture it in my head. And I set it up so that it would become my prayer closet. And I'd wake up early in the morning, I'd go in there, close the door, turn on the light so I'm not waking anybody up, and I would spend time with God. And in the early days of the fast, I remember God saying something to me. I vividly remember. Became something etched in my heart because it was one of the few times that God spoke so absolutely clearly to me. And he said, when it comes time for you to leave, I will be with you. I had no idea what he was talking about because there's no way he was talking about my marriage because divorce was not an option. The only way to have any sort of blessing from God and or the church to divorce would be if he committed adultery. And although I had my suspicions, I had no evidence, I wasn't sure, and I kind of had convinced myself that he would never cheat on me. So there's no way God was talking about that, but I sat on it. And every day I'm praying, and I would go to church every day at lunchtime because they were having corporate prayer. So I would go there too. And one day, my ex-husband, he would sit on the balcony all day long, even in the middle of winter. He had a blanket out there, a TV out there, because he wasn't allowed to smoke in the house. And he was smoking spice, which is synthetic marijuana. That was his drug of choice because he would have random urine tests at work and that didn't show up. So he would be out there, and one day he's out there pretty much passed out in the middle of the day. He wasn't working, long story, not going to get into that, but he was completely out again. And I open the door and I wake him up and I very calmly tell him, just because I'm fasting, don't think I will not kick you out of this house. This is unacceptable. You're high all the time. And I was just so confused. Like I was hearing God, I was spending time with God. My home life was one that was so confusing to me. And I knew something was off. So thankfully, the church I was attending, they have a whole counseling office. And they have people who are going to school for therapy, psychology, and all this stuff. And they can intern at the church to get experience. But it was free to anyone who wanted it. So I called and I made an appointment. And while I was in that session, I was sharing with her kind of my doubts, my thoughts, pretty much why I made an appointment. And then I told her about what I heard God say to me. And she said, the words God uses are very important and they're very intentional. So can you tell me what God said to you again? And I said, when it comes time for you to leave, I'll be with you. And she said, you're saying when? Did he say when or did he say if? And I said, no, he said when. Like the words he spoke were so massively ingrained, like put into my heart. And she said, well, the words he uses matters. So something clicked and I was like, when, if, oh yeah, if, that's one thing, when is another thing. But then I went off into this, mentally with thoughts, this doesn't make sense because God's not okay with divorce. Like, I don't know that he's cheated. How is this okay? Like, isn't he the head of my household? Am I not supposed to submit to him? He got upset at me because I became a member of the church with my daughters. What do I do? How do I handle that? And she proceeded to explain to me what it truly means to be the head of the household and what submission really looks like within the context of a marriage. And by him constantly being high, he's forfeiting his role as the head of the household. And in many ways, I was stepping in and I was having to step in to that role of the head of the household because he was forfeiting that role of his own because he was constantly high and unable to fit the role. And with submission, it comes down to that too. So I was basically being the head of the household without any other option because the person who was supposed to fit that role was forfeiting that role due to his choice of using drugs. And that made a lot of sense to me. I'd never heard anyone say that because growing up, the way I was taught was, and I knew women whose husbands would beat them because they weren't Christian. And the pastors would say that they would have to stay, that they just had to pray for their spouse, that they would just have to fast and pray and wait for the day that God would change their spouse. But until then, they just had to endure, even beatings. So that's how I was raised. And I know it sounds preposterous to some of you, but that's God's honest truth. That's how I was raised. And that's what I thought. So her sharing with me biblically what the roles of marriage are and that whole context of, everybody looks at it as an umbrella. The husband's the head of the household and that whole thing. When she explained it to me biblically, it made a lot of sense. And it opened the door. That's what I would say. It opened the door because God knew that I would never leave if I didn't feel that God would bless it. I was lost, and there's whole things I can get into about what my life was like with God before that. But I just always really wanted, I believed in God. I wanted to please him. So I believe that by God saying those words to me, he was comforting me and letting me know, I see you. I know what's going on. It's time for you to go. And I'm blessing it. That's like that phrase, when it comes time for you to leave, I'll be with you, was essentially what he was telling me so that I would know it's okay. This is not acceptable. I am not okay with this. So it didn't take long. A few days later, he's passed out again on the balcony, and I opened the door, and I don't know if I had a bag or not, but I said, pack your stuff. It's time for you to go. And because of his job, he did have somewhere that he could go, so he wouldn't be like on the street. So that kind of helped too. So with the fast and all that stuff, I got to meet a lot of people. I was trying to build a community because we had moved around a lot because of his job. And I was trying to build a community, and I was choosing church to do that. And there was this thing that happened at the end of the fast. And that's where I met Robin. And Robin, she was the person who paved the way to building a community for me with just amazing, amazing people. Just so full of love and compassion and patience and just selfless people. And Robin became like a mom, a friend, a sister. And then I met Priscilla, who's like my sister, and all these people. And I still talk like Pam and Renee and Casey and like all these people that just, they became my people. So this time where I had my ex leave and I was by myself with these two girls and I was so lost. I didn't know what was happening. My world was turning upside down. But I had these group of people and I was with them multiple times a week because we would all like work out together, and we had a small group and all this stuff. So really those people became my people. And that's the one thing that I would say is you need to have people. You cannot isolate yourself. And if you find yourself isolated with no friends, no one to talk to, unable to talk to anyone, I would really encourage you to take a moment and to assess that, because that's not healthy. Whether you're still in the relationship or just out of it, you need to have a community of people, because it does get tough and it does get hard, and you need those people. You need people to love you, in essence. So I had those people. They were surrounded with me, and I think it was like not even 2 weeks after I had him leave. It was a Saturday. I remember I was about to go to our group, and I got a call from a jail, and I didn't know exactly what happened. All I knew was that he got arrested, and he needed to get bailed out. So I went to my group. I did not miss it. I went to the group, and after the group, I drove all the way to where he was, because it was a ways away from where we lived. He was out partying, I guess, I don't know. And he was there, and I did bail him out. I regret that till today, actually. And because he was not appreciative that I drove all the way and I used my money to bail him out. And he was arrested for larceny, and he was extremely high and drunk, and he actually hit a car on the way. He was arrested at a gas station for stealing. After I took him out, he didn't even know where his car was, where his keys were. He had to call his friends that he was out with the night before to kind of piecemeal the event back together. But that was huge for me, because his parents didn't want me to leave. And the reason they didn't want me to leave him was not because they loved me or anything. I was what kept him in line. I kept him out of trouble and alive. So, because I was such a rule follower, and he would kind of toe the line because of me. So me leaving the picture was a huge risk. And obviously not far into our separation, he gets arrested, right? So that was a big deal. And then, so that was kind of eye-opening. It was almost like, I didn't realize it at the time, but God was, after I heard what he said, and I started to have some autonomy and self-control and take the reins back to my life, he started to unravel and reveal things that were in secret for a long time. That was the first one, where it was like, he's up to no good. He's driving high and drunk all the time. Like it's finally caught up to him. And then in March, and again, this is my opinion. I'm sharing facts, but obviously there's some of my own perceptions in there. And then in March, I think it was, I shared the story of how the health department came to my door and told me I was exposed to syphilis. I share this story in the first season of my story, so that's up above, so you can click on the link if you want to go back and listen to that. But the health department came to my door, told me I was exposed to syphilis. I did not know what syphilis was. I was raised in a very sheltered Christian environment, so I didn't know what that was. Discovered what it was. But the key is not only that happened, it was that's how I found out I was cheated on. So with that whole event, as scary as it is that I could have an STD, it was that monumental moment where you discover you've been cheated on. And thankfully, I had a woman of God that was there with me. Again, another person who was part of my community, Mona. And she prayed with me in that moment, and I had peace, and I handled that very well for what I had just discovered. And that was the weekend I finally told my parents and my brother about what I had been experiencing and what had just happened. So again, I didn't have to go looking for the wrongs that were being done against me. God was revealing these secrets without me going to look for it. It was truly an amazing thing. Then that must have been February, because then after that, another thing that happened was I was having my oldest daughter's birthday party, and it was at my apartment's community club. And we set up and all this stuff. And I think my mom was visiting at the time, and some family came into town. No, this was a different time. My mom was visiting at the time, and I was getting ready, and this woman shows up for my daughter's birthday party without a child and said that she received the invite, and I had no idea who she was, and that her daughter couldn't come, so she just came by herself. And come to find out, my ex had invited her to come to the party. So he invited some woman that I didn't know, who came without her daughter, to a child's birthday party. It was one of those moments where you're just, you feel like a fool. You feel like a fool, and it just added to the eye-opening. But a few months after that, it was around Memorial Day, something happened, and my ex broke down and got very emotional, and seemed like he opened up to me. So when I found out, when the health department came to the door about the syphilis and stuff, I had prayed and fasted to forgive him. I knew that I could not hold on to unforgiveness. I knew I would have to forgive him, but how could I look at him or touch him or be around him after knowing this? Like, my mind couldn't conceive of it. So I fasted and I prayed, and man, I will tell you that I really forgave him, and I felt it. I felt the shift. So a few months later, Memorial Day, when he kind of opened up, I chose to try again. And I told my community and I told my friends, and they were all very wary of it, but they said, this is your decision. Whatever you decide, we will support you. My birthday, July 29th, we were going to go somewhere, but before I got in my car to do something, and I saw the wrapper that he would use to smoke, make blunts out of. And I didn't know if it was old or if it was new. So when I got home, I very calmly, actually I remember it very well because of the impact it had, asked him, I found this, is it new or is it old? Because it could have been old from like before. Supposedly he was sober. His reaction really took me back, and with a bit of a assertive, harsh tone, he said, I don't owe you any explanations. I don't have to tell you anything. And in that moment, I knew he's using again. So I said, this is the last birthday you're ruining. It's over. I can't keep doing this. It was like that cycle over and over again. And I made that decision that day on my birthday that it was over. In my heart, in my spirit, I severed everything. And that was the moment where I knew it was over. I made that choice. But what proceeded after that was hard. It was not easy. The connection in the spirit was broken, and I felt it. I went through about a month of what I would call depression. Went to the doctor. He told me it wasn't depression, it was anxiety. But I was crying all the time, like cry at the drop of a hat. And it was weird for me. I'm not that type of person. Like I'll cry. Like I said, I sit in a pit, but I always kind of move forward and move on. And I just couldn't get out of it. And I would stay I literally moved a mattress to the living room, and I laid in that living room for weeks on end. I would probably take showers like once a week. All I would do is go and take the girls to the bus stop, bring them back, pick them up at the bus stop. And I would work because I worked from home as much as I possibly could from my bed. And I went to the doctor and they gave me medication and set me up with a therapist. So I started to go there, but I was very nervous about taking the medication. I had never felt anything like this before. And then I went down to visit some friends in Florida and had the time of my life. I laughed so much that weekend. We played charades and things like that. It was nothing, out of the ordinary, but it was just so good for my soul. And I laughed so much, and it broke me out of that depression, and I wound up not ever taking the medication. And then over time, I started to get my mind around, okay, I'm going to get divorced. So one of the things that I didn't mention is when I had him leave the house, in North Carolina, you must be physically separated from your spouse for a year before you can even go get a divorce. So I couldn't even go get a divorce if I wanted to. I had to wait till the anniversary of when I had him leave the house. And when I did around Memorial Day reconcile, I didn't have him come back to the house. He wasn't at the house. He was still living where he was. I was just trying to rebuild that relationship with him, which obviously never went far. So after I had that weekend in Florida with friends, that was very good for the soul. Laughter truly is good for the soul. I started to mentally prepare myself for divorce, and I started to make plans of how am I going to be financially independent? What would that look like? What do I need to do? I'm going to have to get a lawyer. My parents helped me with that, financially speaking, because it is very expensive to go through a divorce if you get a lawyer. And so I was ready. I was ready to do it, and I was going to go to New Jersey for work. And when I did that, I was going to be getting my own health insurance. So that was kind of like a monumental, it was a work trip, but I was also preparing myself for the divorce. And I had prayed and I asked God, is this really what you want? Like, am I making the right choice? I still was very concerned about God's approval of this whole situation. And the day I came back from New Jersey from that trip, I had signed up for my health insurance. I was all ready to go to be this independent single mom. And I get home, and that very day is the day that I receive a Facebook message by a woman who claims to have had my ex-husband's baby. And through dialogue, it became very obvious that she was true. When you looked at the pictures, it was very obvious that he was the father. This baby looked just like him, which was her way of actually how she introduced that whole conversation. And it was one of those moments, which is why I think I never cried. I talk about that in the first episode. I wasn't surprised per se. I mean, the betrayal was hard, but I kind of knew. I had always said I wouldn't be surprised if a woman shows up at my door with your baby and you have this whole secret family I don't know about. So I find out about this baby, and all I can think is I prayed and I asked God for confirmation. I did not go looking for this. Had no idea. She found me. And this baby was almost a year old by this point. And she found me by my business page, which was a whole fictitious name. I had an identity as a coach that was Andy D. And one of the reasons I did that was because my ex was adamant that I change my name on Facebook so that people could not find me because of the security concerns he had that were related to his job. So not only did he have a completely different name from his real name, he had me change my name. So the fact that this woman found me was odd. And so I questioned her and I asked her all this stuff, and it wound up being true. And there was a DNA test and all that stuff. So to me, that was it. I am 100% sure that God is blessing this and I'm going to move forward and I have plans to move forward. And it was already hard throughout that year because now it was November time frame. It was almost a year. It was already a tough year. Now this is getting real. And I'm just trying to think about what I share next because I want to honor his privacy and make sure that I don't misstate something. So what I'll say is this. A protective order, a restraining order, whatever you want to call it, was issued. Not by me, but by someone else. So there was a restraining order that happened, and then I met with a lawyer and we started the divorce process. And the divorce process, for anyone who's gone through it or anyone who's wondering, at least where I was from in North Carolina, was very difficult because he made it difficult. Because now we had to prove that we were separated for a year and he kept pushing that. And obviously the custody portion of it was very difficult. And there were a lot of lies that were being told. And the judge didn't know me. The judge didn't know him. And how do they know that I'm not just a spiteful wife who's telling lies to keep him away? I had the protective order that shared some information, but basically it took over a year. Actually, it took a year and a half to finalize the whole thing. And it was good because time wound up revealing who he really was. And in many ways, who I was, to the point where the final judgment resulted in almost a 20-page order, custody order, and there's a divorce order as well. But the custody order is a very detailed account of all of the stuff that I endured. And the judge postponed a lot of things, and it was very frustrating in the moment. I next week I'm going to share with you how my healing process started, so that I'll talk a little bit about that then. But it was a very dark time because you see a lot of lies prevailing and you see a lot of evil winning. And how do you defend the truth? How do you prove the truth? You can't even prove the lie, but you can't prove the truth either. And he seems to speak a lot louder and he's very convincing, and obviously he's good at what he does. I find him to be a manipulator. And again, this is my perceptions of the situation, my side of the story. Everyone has their own side. He will have his own side. But ultimately, in the end, truth won. Ultimately, in the end, good won. And I wound up not only getting the divorce, and it became very clear that he lied about the separation because I had much evidence, but also the custody, and I wound up getting sole exclusive custody of the girls. But getting to that was those were the most difficult 2 years of my life. It was very dark. And even with a community, it felt very lonely. You feel very lost. So what I want to say with this is that for those of you who are maybe going through what I went through the 2 years, I want you to know that it may look dark right now and it may seem hopeless, but I want you to know that there's hope. I want you to know that good wins and that at some point your life will move on. And I know it doesn't feel like it now, it feels very dark, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And this is where you must know who God is. And you need to hold on to the goodness of God with everything that you have, but also surround yourself with a community of people that love you. And if they love God, even the more benefit, but people who are really going to support you and get you to that place where you're going to feel good again. And you will get there. It may be hard, but you will get there. If you're in the abusive relationship now, completely unable to decide what am I going to do, or afraid of the transition of leaving and what that looks like, or maybe you're not financially. I had a job, so I had my own money. I knew women who they were stay-at-home moms with little kids. What were they going to do? They didn't have a family to back them up. Surround yourself with people who are going to love you, who are going to support you. Pray and ask God to make a way, and be aware so that when that opportunity comes, you can take it. But no, please know that leaving is just a first step. It's a monumental step that leads to massive amounts of freedom. And I'm not even saying that you need to rush into a divorce. What I'm saying is that you need to separate yourself from that situation so that you can think clearly, and surround yourself with loving, wise people who are giving you advice that bring you joy, peace, and love. And that does not mean that what they're suggesting to you is going to feel very peaceful in the moment, but it will be something that your spirit will know they are giving me good, sound advice. Abuse is not okay, ever. I do not care how spiritual the leader is, how old they are, how many years they've been in ministry, how long they've been married. Abuse is not okay, ever. You deserve more than that. God does not want you to go through it. So that is my story of how I got out. It was totally God that carried me through. It was God that set in my heart that it was okay, that He blessed it. And maybe this video is that for you. And leaving is the first step. And then you have a whole journey that you have to go through to transition out. There's a lot of logistical stuff that happens, especially if you have kids. And having a community of people around you is going to be key, but also knowing who God is. I didn't know who God is like I know today. If I had known God like I know today, I feel like that transition would have been easier than what it was. But that's okay, because ultimately I am where I am now. And had I not gone through that, I wouldn't be where I am now. And I'm able to share my story with you. So that's the story of how I left an abusive relationship and the transition that happened. And next episode, I'll share with you the healing process of how I healed. Because that time was a time of coping, of getting through. I was fighting. I was fighting really hard, and it was dark, but I had my battle buddies to help me through the process. But then healing needed to come, and it did. It did. And I'm going to share that with you next episode. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for being a part of my story. If this has blessed you, remember, subscribe, like, and follow, because the next season of the podcast I'm pretty excited for you. So I'm going to keep it a surprise, but I do have a plan that I'm going to share with you guys. And after that, Oh yeah, and share it. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought because I have to go to a meeting. But after that, share it. Share it with your friends. If you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. If you can share it to your wall, I'd really appreciate it and encourage people to go watch the podcast or subscribe to my YouTube. But maybe share it privately with someone that you know is going through this or has gone through this, or maybe you're going through it and you're like, I need someone to listen to this and see, has Andrea gone berserkos? Or is there something to this? Because I think it's important. I don't expect you to take what I say as scripture, right? Like, this is my story from my perspective. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. And I look forward to ending this episode with healing and how God came through and how He taught me to heal from that whole experience. So thank you so much, guys. You have a wonderful one, and I will talk to you next time.